Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Drinkers and Thinkers. My name's Dan, and I'll be dragging you through the next hour of content. You can find us on our website, drinkersthinkers.com. You can find us on any of your favorite podcasting platforms, and I encourage you to drop us a message, drop us a comment, start a conversation. So, we are without Mike this week, my co-host, and he will be back on the next episode, which we'll tease later on in the episode. So today, it's just me flying solo, so buckle up. This episode is all about Joe Biden's first year in office, a retrospective, if you will. We're going to grade him. So any of you conservative-leaning folks that feel like sometimes I'm a little too nice to liberals and a little too mean to you, well, your day has come. Let's talk about this president. So just one real guideline for me, and so that you understand how I'm approaching this before we start. This isn't a policy discussion. I'm not breaking down the things he's promised or the things that have been passed and saying, well, this is good because, or this is bad because. I'm looking at the efficacy of the president. So if he promised X, did we deliver on that promise? What went wrong in delivering on that promise? We're not going to debate the virtues of X, not on this episode. We can get into deep policy conversations, and I'm always open to and welcome suggestions from listeners. You can send me a message, and if you have an interesting idea for a show or a topic within a show, I'm happy to hear them. This is not that. It's not a policy discussion. This is more about politics than policy. So, with that said, where to start? Well, let's talk about a few things that were promises made during the campaign that were kept. So this is by no means an exhaustive list, but these are the things that I think were front and center on the campaign, things he brought up more than once. They weren't just mentioned in passing. So our return to the Paris Accords. Now, again, this is not a policy conversation. We can debate whether or not the Paris Accords matter at all. We can debate whether it's too slow, it's too restrictive, whatever. We're back in. It was a promise kept. It was a promise made, promise kept. This was, of course, something that his predecessor pulled us out of, and it was something he mentioned on numerous occasions, and he even mentioned in debates. So we're back in it, and promise kept. He has moved the U.S. towards zero emissions by 2050. Now, this is almost an extension of the Paris Climate Accords, but this zero emissions thing, yes, he kept the promise. He did whatever it is he had to do that. But I do question the efficacy of that. And that's not a Joe Biden thing, and I'm not going to give him a strike on this. But any future president can undo this. This is not something that's by any means safe. The same can be said of climate accords, but of course, when you put a date on something, zero emissions by 2050, if we spend the next 30 years under a Republican-controlled White House and Congress, that's just not going to happen. You're not going to meet that date. I think the date is pretty arbitrary, and it's pretty far off, I think, by design, because Biden's going to be long dead before anyone can come back to him and say, hey, we didn't hit your target number. So this, to me, is a zero win. Who cares? But he did it. It was promise made, promise kept. He has reversed the transgender ban on serving in the military. Good on him. Good move. Promise made, promise kept. The Muslim travel ban has been repealed. I believe that was a day one move by him. So, promise made, promise kept. Good. It was racist. And that's that. Those are the big ones that I have floating around in my head. Those are the big ones. Those are the big promises kept. I can't think of any others, to be honest. And there were a lot of them. There are exhaustive lists online. There are trackers of his promises online. And obviously, the vast majority of them have not been fulfilled. Now, first of all, it's 1 year in a 4-year presidency. So Fair enough. My fear is that this first year should have been the most active. We should have seen a flurry of activity in this first year, because there are certain truths that if you're Joe Biden and the Democrats that you need to accept, and I don't think they've wrapped their mind around this. Number one, you control the Congress. You have 2 years to govern. And when I say 2 years, I really mean one. You had 1 year to govern, and it's gone. And anything big that was going to happen was going to happen last year. You're not going to get into major earth-shaking healthcare reform in the August before a midterm election. It's just not going to happen. Legislation from here on out is dead. You can't expect anything. Beyond that, I do expect that the Democrats will lose control of at least one house of Congress, if not both, but it effectively ends the ability of Joe Biden to pass anything meaningful from his wish list. So while you can say, well, it's only 1 year, he's got 3 years left, he's warming up, unfortunately, I think we've seen all we're going to see from this White House, which leaves a lot of things just dead on the floor. But to that end, let's talk about a few things where Biden has really fallen short. And I blame Biden squarely because these are things, to my knowledge, do not require congressional approval. And we'll talk about the Congress. Obviously, that has been a big story in Biden year one. The two are inexorable. We cannot talk about Biden's performance without talking about the Senate particularly. But let's talk about things that Biden could have done, has not done, doesn't seem like he will do. Direct the Attorney General to restructure how we enforce existing gun laws. That hasn't been done. There's been no movement. The discussions around it have been very confused. There's been no forward movement. That is saying, you know what? We probably can't pass big gun legislation, but we can at least get more aggressive. You know, when Trump wanted to get more aggressive on immigration, that magically happened. So this could magically happen as well. Now, again, we're not going to debate the policy because obviously people have very differing opinions. I have very differing opinions for most Democrats. But the reality is that I think they know this is a politically toxic issue. So he's afraid to address this. But it was a promise made and a promise so far broken. By extension, I think he had also promised that he would ask the FBI to compile reports on delays in background checks, and that hasn't happened either. Another big promise made and so far not kept. Very disappointed by this, and that is the migrant detentions, the undocumented persons coming to this country who are being detained. Yes, the numbers are down, but not nearly far down enough. Deportations have continued, particularly using, I think it's Title 42 of U.S. Code, which is the health provision that says we can deport people rapidly because of health concerns, which, fair enough, I had advocated that the borders should be closed during the pandemic, not just the southern border. I think we should have banned all international traffic during the worst of the pandemic. It would have been on 3 occasions in particular that I said we need to stop letting people come here. We need to stop flights coming into the country. Nothing is so essential that you need to fly from Belgium to the United States in the middle of a pandemic. So, yes, fair enough, there was a public health concern, but it was really just a continuation of the Trump policy of shooting people through this revolving door of deportation. And I don't think it had to do with public health, because otherwise other common sense measures would have been enacted on the border. We were not trying to prevent the spread of COVID. We were just trying to rapidly deport people, which is exactly what the Trump administration was doing. Now, Biden was doing it to a lesser extent, but it still, he did not do nearly enough. It is offensive. And that's that. To that end, he promised to raise the refugee cap to 125,000 people. I think Trump had it around like 10,000 people. He hasn't done that. It hasn't gotten anywhere near that number. It's half that. It's like 50, 60,000 right now he raised the cap to. I don't know what he's waiting for. I don't know what the issue here is. But nonetheless, promise made, promise, mostly broken, half kept. Moving on, he also promised to ban new oil and gas leases. He's equivocated on this. He's had some movement on this, but it's very clear that it is not his intention to ban all new leases on oil drilling. That's not going to happen. Now, again, this isn't a policy conversation, especially as we find ourselves in the midst of rising gas prices. Some people are saying we're having a gas crisis. I don't think it's a crisis. Nonetheless, this isn't about the policy. This is just about the fact that he came in guns blazing. This is what we're going to do, and we've only gotten a half measure on this. And like many things Biden that we're going to see, this is a recurring theme. What his intention is and what the plan is all very confusing. There's no clarity coming from the White House on a lot of these issues. So that's just a bunch of things that the president can do on his own without congressional approval, as far as I understand, that have not been done. Now, as for what presidents can do on their own, let's move to a big topic, foreign policy. This is usually the domain of the president. He is fairly unfettered as pertains to foreign policy, how we relate to other countries. And this is a very up and down, I have to be honest. Foreign policy is a very up and down, leaving us with a very sort of mediocre at best. What has he done well? Well, the pivot to Asia is good. He has executed this much more cleanly and in a much more mature fashion than his predecessor, who also had a pivot to Asia. Biden has done it in a much more professional manner, a much more. There seems to be much more of a plan. There seems to be more engagement of the Asia Pacific community in this, the so-called Quad group. Now, a lot of this is sort of bulwarking against China, and we can argue the pros and cons about antagonizing China. We can talk about, are they an adversary? Are they a competitor? Are they an enemy? I'll restate my thinking. I think China is an adversary. Russia is an enemy. I think there's a distinction between those two things. We can certainly coexist in a world with China. And there are certain positive steps that have been taken. But there's also, on the other hand, I don't think the tariffs are helpful. They have continued. This is another continuation of Trump-era policies. And I don't think they're helpful, particularly in the midst of a supply chain crisis, which has been going on long before the war in Ukraine. It has been going on since the middle of COVID. To place tariffs on goods right now is not helpful. And since I don't really see a long-term strategy for those tariffs, how they long-term envision that those tariffs will work. Now, they did bring engagement with China. Trump had some positive steps forward with China at the end of his presidency. But we are in the midst of a crisis, several crises. And at the moment, this is probably not helpful as relates to supply chain, but also particularly, these are people whose help we might want or need regarding Russia. And they have been wishy-washy at best on that. We don't know which way that's going to blow. If anything, we can use the tariffs as some leverage, although I don't think China is really that perturbed by the tariffs yet. I think their effect is much more long-term, and I think China realizes there's got to be some kind of deal put in place before the tariffs really start to hurt. And I'm not sure which country would crack first. I think China is more able to weather economic hardship than the United States. So the tariffs have been continued under Trump. The pivot to Asia is good. At least there's some engagement. At least it's being done in a professional and mature manner. But very little of substance has come from that. Now, it is a long game. It is something that Biden can continue to work on even when he is effectively dead on arrival in Congress. At the point at which the Congress is gone, he can't pass any domestic laws, but at least he can continue to work towards this. So it's a long game. We can see what happens, but so far, no major breakthroughs, but also, at least vis-a-vis China and Asia Pacific, no major blunders. Now, this pivot to Asia is often viewed as being at Europe's expense. In a lot of ways it is. I've been vocal in my viewpoint that Europe's time is over, that the next century will be dominated by, we think, the United States and China, but at the very least, we know China's in it to win it. So this pivot to Asia is important since we are now the two major players. Europe is a place that has diminished in importance for, I would argue, since World War II. It has consistently diminished in importance. That doesn't mean we shouldn't engage with them. I know that there's a lot of frustration from the European community that our attentions and our priorities are elsewhere. Now, that said, Ukraine has certainly snapped our attention back to Europe. In the long run, it might be a good thing for Europe. Europe seems like it is almost kind of going to assert itself and maybe even take on a leadership role, not waiting for the U.S. On everything, which is good and can lead to, it has certainly brought us back a little bit closer to our European allies. But we'll see what the long-term effects of this are. And whereas I said in Asia, especially regarding China, there haven't been any major blunders, I do think there have been blunders in Europe. I wouldn't call them major blunders, with one exception. Two exceptions, but one of them is Afghanistan, and we'll put an asterisk on that and talk about it later. That is, of course, a major blunder. We'll get to that, but it also had negative repercussions for our relations with some European countries. There have been bungles here, though. The one major one I referenced outside of Afghanistan is the submarine thing with Australia. So France had a contract with Australia to sell them some diesel submarines. This contract apparently was, 5 or 10 years old. They hadn't delivered any of the boats yet, and the United States negotiated a separate deal with Australia to sell them our own submarines. However, the French were never looped in on this. Macron went apoplectic and even, I believe, withdrew some diplomats from the U.S., and it got tense, albeit a little bit silly, because obviously the United States and France were not going to break off diplomatic relations. But it was an incident, and it was certainly preventable, and I still don't fully understand the strategy of the Biden administration knowingly cutting France out of this deal. France was, in fairness, they were completely ambushed by this, and it was just a bad look. It doesn't have any long-term negative effect on France. We didn't tank their economy by doing this. It really has no effect. But there's a perception problem here. It's embarrassing, and it was completely avoidable. And this feels like the kind of thing you do if your intention is to embarrass another country. And I just don't think that was the intention. I think this was just a mistake, but it was a stupid mistake. It was one that you should have known better. There was no way. I just don't understand how you don't know better. Major blunder. When we're talking about trying to repair trust, damage that was done during the Trump administration, we're trying to repair trust with Europe. There was absolutely no reason for this. So anyway, very mixed bag on Europe. Ukraine might go a long way to propelling us forward in a more positive way. From here on out, we might have better and closer relations with them, but it's also possible that the whole thing falls apart, and that no one wants to take a lead on Ukraine, and that chaos reigns, and that Russia continues its expansion, and no one knows what to do, and no one wants to be the first one to fire a shot. Who knows? like we said in the Ukraine episode, this could get messy fast. So who knows? But mixed bag on Europe. Performance on Asia is better. It's a good time to mention, I'm not a fan of the Secretary of State. I don't think he's bad. I don't think he's good. I think he's just there. I think that's just sort of defined his time there. I call him blink and you'll miss him, because I just don't think in a world that is very busy and very tumultuous, I just don't see him enough, and I don't see any strong relationships being built personally. The Secretary of State should have good relationships with their counterparts. I'm not seeing that, and I'm not entirely sure that's all Blinken's fault. Obviously, there are variables, and that is that sometimes people just don't click, and I'm just not seeing any real constructive, strong relationships, and that is sort of, the president conducts diplomacy on a very public, visible, and scrutinized level. The Secretary of State and his office are sort of a step down from that. You can conduct more private conversations, more off-the-record conversations. You can do more in that role, and it just doesn't seem like it's being done. Now, in fairness, as we're talking about foreign policy, I see a general aimlessness. I don't see an overarching... There's no Biden Doctrine. There's no Biden Doctrine. There is a specific focus on Asia, which is going well. There is a vague focus on restoring trust, which it's not happening fast, and it shouldn't. Trust is restored over time. And actually, let me take that idea and pivot into another realm of foreign policy, and that's the Middle East. And I'll start specifically with Iran, because when I say trust is regained over time. So we're in the nuclear deal with Iran under Obama. I supported the deal. I support any deal that deals with nuclear weapons and that normalizes relations with states that we don't have good relations with. Diplomacy is good for everyone, and earnest, good faith steps forward are good for everyone. Iran is not run by lunatics. It is a country that will act in its own best interests, just like China will act in its own best interests. And contrast that with a country like North Korea or Russia, who are run by lunatics, people who have motives other than what's best for the country and the people. And that is not to say that China and Iran's motives politically are selfless. They're not doing what they do for their people, but they understand that what's good for the country is good for the people and is good for the party in power. They understand those things, and we can deal with countries on that level. Iran is a country I really do believe we can deal with, we can have relations with, if we can hold our nose and kiss the Saudi royal family's boots. I'm sure we can strike some sort of a deal with Iran. We'll get to Saudi Arabia in a moment. So there was an opportunity to get us back in the Iran deal. Obama had it, Trump nixed it, and Biden promised to get us back. The problem is that should have been done early. It should have been done day one. And it hasn't. Now, there's been chatter about it in this year, this calendar year, I mean. So in the last month or two, there's been chatter about it. It seems like talks are going to renew. The problem is these things take a while, as we know. And here's the major two issues now that loom very large. One, the Democrats are likely to lose control of the Congress. And if you're Iran, you can see that coming a mile away. So if talks start before that midterm, the price of peace, so to speak, the price of these deals is going to be much higher for us, because they know if they don't get it done now, Biden probably can't get this done later. And the other issue that crops up is in the same vein, and that is that Iran has to look at this and say, it is also likely that the Democrats are going to lose the White House. Now, whoever steps up to fill that void, it's going to be either Donald Trump or someone of that ilk. Ron DeSantis comes to mind. Whoever jumps in and takes that seat is likely to scrap any deal made with Iran again. So you've got two problems here. One is that Iran might look at this and say, well, we can really make them sweat on this deal and get an even better deal for ourselves because they have to do it now or never. But they could also look at this in a much more practical way and say, why would we make a deal with the people who screwed us on the first deal when we know you ain't going to be in the office in 3 years? And I probably, if it were me, I don't know what promises Joe Biden could make to me that I would feel comfortable with, because they're not going to be kept. If Biden loses the White House, whatever deal we make is gone. It's gone day one, and we're back to square one. So I think this should have been done early. It could have been done. There's no reason diplomacy couldn't have been conducted starting January 21st on this. So waited too long on Iran. As for the larger Middle East, again, this is part of this sort of up and down lack of focus and lack of intensity in foreign policy by Biden. Again, we focus on Asia, but we have no focus on the Middle East. The Middle East is business as usual. There is confusion and no answer as to what our policy regarding Syria is. We send mixed messages on Yemen, where we say we're opposed to what's happening in Yemen. We support the cessation of hostilities, and then by the same token, we go and sell $600 million worth of weapons to the Saudis, who are prosecuting this illegal war, who are conducting operations that are clearly crimes against humanity. They are engineering famines in Yemen just to kill people. We're supporting this behavior. Now, it is business as usual with Saudi Arabia. Speaking of adversaries or enemies or friends, these are our enemies. Saudi Arabia has been at the root of all of the violence against the U.S. from Muslim extremists, and it goes completely ignored by our presidents. We sanction Putin, but we don't sanction the Saudi royal family. The Saudi royal family has a journalist killed in an embassy, chopped up, put in garbage bags, and tossed away. And we do nothing. They have a far worse record on human rights than China and Russia combined. We say and we do nothing. They're prosecuting an illegal war in Yemen. We say and we do nothing. I could go on and on and on. This is a country that should be a pariah. This is a country that should be isolated. This is a country, frankly, that if you were going to decapitate any country's leadership after 9/11, this is the one. Now, I'm not advocating an invasion of Saudi Arabia or regime change. I'm just saying that sometimes there is very stark good and evil in the world. And these guys are no good. They're rotten to the core. They're the root of all evil. They're the root of all money for evil in the world. And we should not be doing business with these people. We should not have relations with these people. But of course, I'm going off on a tangent because there was no chance that that was ever going to happen under Biden. It was never promised. Biden is a business as usual regarding Saudi Arabia, as has every U.S. president has kowtowed to them in my lifetime. So I can't beat Biden up for that because it's business as usual. But there is no Middle Eastern plan here. There's no approach. It's all very confused. It's all very scattershot. And the other major thing there that gets left out is we are and continue to be nowhere with Israel and Palestine. And there is, of course, new Israeli leadership, and there is absolutely no relationship there. And I don't know if we're trying to build one, but it sure doesn't seem like it. So I think there is no hope that the Israeli Palestinian problem is going to be addressed by the Biden administration, even if he had 8 years. I just don't think it's going to happen. So we continue there, business as usual, both sides committing heinous crimes against each other, and we're just going to have to get used to that. Foreign policy, overall, I'll give him a C+. I'll give him a C+. Good focus where he focuses, so good focus on Asia. Everything else is scattershot. It's confused. I don't understand what the approach is in most of these, for most of these countries, most of these regions. But I'm not going to go lower than C+, because we talked about the Australian submarine kerfuffle, but there hasn't been any other massive blunder or antagonism or any of the mistakes that, willful mistakes that plagued the previous administration. What have I not talked about? I have not talked about Latin America because, frankly, neither has he. All of the focus on South America, Central America, all of the focus, and again, this isn't a Biden-specific problem, so I'm not going to grade him on this. I'm not going to factor this in. All of the focus on our policies towards South and Central America mostly have to do with immigration, because it is in the self-interest of one of our parties that makes a lot of noise about it, and that becomes the thrust of all of our brain power regarding foreign relations with South and Central America. There doesn't seem to be anything else on the table ever. So that's not just a Biden problem, it's an everyone problem. And that just continues. South and Central America continue to be ignored. Some countries are pressing forward and making progress. Other countries are regressing or have, collapsed, like Venezuela. And I think that's just the way it's going to be. It's a part of the world that's going to continue to cost us a lot of money, and I believe be a tremendous missed opportunity for building a community in our own freaking neighborhood. But there you have it. There is no Latin American policy, so it's not worth talking about. And the other big omission from this grade and from this discussion has been Africa. In brief, if we're going to remain entirely disconnected from Africa, other than just sending them money and medicine, then China is going to continue to fill the void. And it will be Chinese business and Chinese investment that defines the future of Africa, rather than the U.S. and the West. If that's our choice, then that's our choice. Again, we're not going to discuss whether policy is good or bad, but clearly that's what the policy is. So I'm not factoring it into the grade because there's been virtually nothing done, and there is nothing on the horizon. So there's nothing to discuss there, really. So C+ foreign policy. Now, many of you may have noticed I've left out one big foreign policy issue, and that is Afghanistan. F on Afghanistan. F for fuck off. This was a blunder, the likes of which I never imagined this president and this administration could have been capable of making. This was a blunder that I saw us headed towards under Trump. Now, first of all, let me say I agreed with getting out of Afghanistan, and there are many reasons for that. I'm not going to make this show or segment about Afghanistan because there's so much to talk about there. It doesn't do the subject credit. Secondly, I don't think people are particularly interested in it. So let me just say this. If you'd like to understand the reasons why I believe it was time to leave Afghanistan, probably a long time ago, by the way, I can't recommend strongly enough that you go find the SIGAR reports. SIGAR, Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction. This was an office put together by our government to oversee the reconstruction of Afghanistan, to oversee the progress of it, to oversee the administration of it. So they were watching where the money went, where the resources went. They were evaluating how this all was going, and they make quarterly reports to Congress. All of those are available on their website, and you can read some of them, and they are frankly horrifying. To give you some idea of what Afghanistan was, the CGAR, which is this is a government entity chosen by our government to do this job. This is not an independent journalist. These aren't just, vice journalists trying to cause trouble for the government. So on this website, you can find their, quote, gallery of greed. This is a exhaustive list of people who stole money from the United States, mostly military, and our own contractors. The amount of money that had been wasted, misallocated, and just outright stolen is staggering. The degree of progress made in 20 years was not nearly what they made it out to be in public. The CGAR reports illustrate all of this. It is stark. It is frightening that this was allowed to go on for so long. And all the while that we are propping up an unbelievably corrupt Afghan government, the Taliban was waiting. They were waiting in caves. They were learning the lessons. They learned lessons over the 20 years we were there. We failed to learn those lessons time and time again. We never learned from our mistakes. We never learned from the mistakes of the Afghan government. Hamid Karzai, the guy that the airport was named after, was accused of corruption more times than I can count. There is good evidence for this. His brother was a drug lord who was also on the payroll of the CIA. The corruption in Afghanistan ran so deep that it was absolutely unsalvageable. And Ghani, who put his money in a suitcase and fled the country at the first sign of trouble, this guy should be forced into a room with Zelensky and let Zelensky beat the life out of him. Our time in Afghanistan was over, and it was over a long time ago. So I agree with the decision to get out. It is absolutely inexcusable how that was executed. And again, I could see that coming with Trump, that it was going to be ugly and chaotic. But I didn't even think twice about it when Biden took office. I was heartened by the fact that it did seem like Biden was going to continue this policy and get us out of there. The fact that they were caught so flat-footed is absolutely inexcusable. There was intelligence out there. There was intelligence out there that said that the government was weak and would fall. There was intelligence out there, and just observational intelligence, that said the Afghan security forces were in no way prepared to defend the country. There were decisions made that as long as they believed they could defend the cities, the rest of the country didn't matter, and they couldn't even do that. Now you're going to say, well, the Pentagon said this and the State Department. The Pentagon lied. Those generals in their uniforms went to Congress and lied, knowingly lied about the state of things in Afghanistan. Why? To ensure that the need for them to be there was perpetual. And the State Department, well, they're just idiots. They're just naive. It was a disgraceful affair. And I blame Joe Biden 100%. 100%. You are the guy in charge. And even if blunders were going to be forced by the deceit of the Pentagon and the incompetence of the State Department, even if we accept that this wasn't going to be smooth because those factors were working against it already, it still could have gone so much. Why weren't Americans not being evacuated for months leading up to this? Well, the reason is because nobody thought the country would collapse, except that everyone knew the country would collapse, except the Biden administration. These people should have been evacuated under Trump, slowly but surely. These special visas should have been processed. Get the Afghani people that we promised to get out, get them out early. You can't tell me they didn't stand around the Situation Room going, yep, this is going to be fine. The government's going to stand up and we should be good for a while. You can't tell me that in that Situation Room, nobody at that table said, hey, okay, but just hypothetically, what if it's not okay? What if this does collapse fast? Shouldn't we have a contingency plan? Or shouldn't we start now getting our people out? Nope. We lost a war to the Taliban. Let's make no mistake about what happened here. We lost a 20-year war to the Taliban. The most humiliating thing I've ever seen is the Taliban providing security for our soldiers as they slink off to the airport. It's mind-boggling, and it was preventable. And it also marked a turning point, I believe, for the Biden administration. And since then, the opiate of victory is wearing off. Even among Democrats, people have no confidence in this administration. And yes, there is a lot of anger that comes from the right, and you just sort of have to tune that out if you're Biden. But if you're Biden and the Democrats and you're not paying attention to the anger coming from the center and the left of center and the far left, if you're not realizing that at a 42% approval rating, you are never, ever going to get reelected, I don't know what to tell you then. Afghanistan was a turning point. It was the point at which we went, oh, this president's human after all, because before that, all we were dealing with was COVID. And I'll get to COVID, but I'm grading Afghanistan separately from everything else, and it's an F. It's an F. And, well, we'll move on because there's an entire domestic agenda that is going nowhere. In fairness, I will separate the domestic issues into two categories broadly. There's COVID, and there's everything else. COVID, I'm going to make this brief. I give him an A on COVID, not an A+. The plus is gone just because there were missteps, miscommunications. There were moments when the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing, when one office didn't know what the other was going to say, moments where the White House and the medical community didn't seem to be on the same page. You expect those things. It's not a big deal, and none of them led to any material fallout. So it's an A. He did everything a president is supposed to do in a time of crisis and a time of tragedy. He did all of the things that, had Donald Trump done them, Donald Trump would still be president. It would not have cost Donald Trump anything. He wouldn't have had to compromise any of his positions, such as they were. All he had to do was get in front of a camera every so often and say whatever word salad of nonsense platitudes that presidents say during times like this. Our hearts go out to the victims. Melania and I are praying for blah, blah, blah. We'll get through this together. Red, white, and blue. Huzzah. America strong. America good. Whatever little word salad you put together, that's all he needed to do. And I guarantee you he would still be president. And I know that because I think all of us widely agree that the only reason he lost the election was because of COVID. So not only did that not have to happen, not only did it not have to hurt Donald Trump, but it could have helped Donald Trump. And he didn't have the smarts or the political instinct to even capitalize on that. And let that be my indictment of his intellect, such as it is. Biden did all of those things. Did Biden lock himself in a basement and discover the cure? No. Did he do anything tangible himself? No. But he did everything you were supposed to do. And at the end of the day, if you're president during a time of crisis and tragedy, it's make the right decisions, make the safe decisions, make the decisions that don't cause unforced errors, say all the right things, and stay the hell out of the way of the people who actually do the good. Biden did those things. Now, obviously, the right has a different view of this, but again, part of the job is to tune out the noise. Biden was right, and he did the right things here. So it doesn't matter what his opponents say on this particular issue, because they're wrong universally. And Biden did and said all the right things. I give him an A on this. This is, and if you think about Biden and you think about Trump, one has to think about Rudy Giuliani. And if you lived in New York, you know that Rudy Giuliani was not exactly well liked towards the end of his time in the mayor's office, that he had a lot of problems, both political and personal. 9/11 catapulted him above all of that. And he became, America's mayor. Now, in the last few years, the rest of the country is finally seeing the Rudy Giuliani that many of us knew for years, and why so many people disliked him. But for that moment, he did and said all the right things. He did exactly what you're supposed to do. He did what Trump failed to do or even understand. So, A for Biden on COVID. Now, as for the rest of the domestic agenda, such as it is, there becomes a problem here, and that is that you can't separate the Congress from the president. So the first thing I would say is, without any discussion, I give the Congress an F. Both the Democrats and the Republicans, they get an F. So whatever grade Biden gets on domestic issues has to be higher than the F, even though my assertion is he's accomplished very little of note. And that does count against him. It has to. At the end of the day, when you're the president, you're the president. When you fail to wrangle your own party, when you fail to wrangle the other party, when you fail on basic tactics in legislation, it reflects on you and your legacy. And his legacy, if his presidency ended today, will be COVID, Afghanistan, and I don't know what else, because there is nothing else. The one legislative victory that I can point to is the infrastructure bill. And folks, nobody gets up in the morning for the infrastructure bills. First of all, this was not the transformative infrastructure bill that he wanted to pass, that he promised to pass. This was the infrastructure bill that has been passed by 4 or 5 other Congresses. And that is that, well, we didn't maintain our infrastructure for the last 12 years, and we didn't pay our bills, so we're going to pass a huge bill to do all that. There's nothing in this bill that's transformative. There's nothing in this bill that's exciting. There's nothing in this bill that propels America into the future, that even gives any type of vision of America's future infrastructure, whether it be tangible, like things like high-speed rail, or, fixing our dangerously broken air traffic control network, or it be things like the so-called human infrastructure, or it be things like future technologies, smart roads, energy grid. None of these things happened. This is a bill designed to pay the debt that we've accrued for many years of doing nothing, which also obviously gets more expensive the longer you wait. If it cost X to fix a bridge in 2015, if you wait till 2020, it costs X plus. So this is not a victory. And the signing ceremony and backslapping over this, you're humiliating yourself. And then there's the fact that this bill was tied to the Build Back Better bill. First of all, I'll say this right now. I don't often find myself in the squads camp, the so-called squad in Congress, the far left wing of Congress, and it's not that it's there's some ideological discourse between them and I, but it's really just their approach. I think they're just grandstanders, but I was firmly behind them on holding the infrastructure bill up until something else got passed. The better bill got passed. And their assertion was, and they were very frank, and again, I give them a lot of credit for this, we don't trust the Democratic Party. And in the end, well, turns out they were right. This bill was held up so that the the Build Back Better bill, or some version of it, would get passed. And in the end, even the squad surrendered. Even the far left flank of the Democratic Party surrendered. I give them no credit. I know they voted against it, but in Ayanna Pressley's own words, she made sure the bill had enough votes to pass before she voted against it. That's cowardice. That's cowardice. I thought it was a smart tactic to hold up the bill to pass something that would actually be meaningful. Now, again, we're not going to debate what was in the Build Back Better bill. There are some things I like. There are some things I don't like. But at least it was something. We're going to hold up the infrastructure bill until we actually address at least some of the things that affect everyday Americans. And this is politics, folks. If you're wrong and your bill sucks, you're going to get punished for that in the next election. Barack Obama found that out the hard way. He passed his health care bill, which sucked and didn't have anything in it. It was not what he promised, and it did not help nearly as many people as it needed to, and boy, did that suck for him in those midterms. He was punished for that bill. So if your bill is no good, you'll be punished for it. That shouldn't stop you from trying. That shouldn't stop you from trying. And I know we can't not talk about major roadblocks in the Senate. Kristen Sinema, I don't know what she wants. I don't know what she wants. She's an attention hog. I don't know what her positions are. I know that she is wildly out of step with her voter base in Arizona to an extent that it's likely she could cost the Democrats an Arizona Senate seat. Just not hers. She could cost Mark Kelly his seat, which is crazy because she's so out of touch with her own voter base there. Now, Joe Manchin, on the other hand, I would say that, no, he's pretty much in lockstep with his voter base back in West Virginia. If it's going to help people or clean the environment, they're opposed to it. He's towing the line. And I'll say this about Manchin. I don't think he relishes the position he's in. I don't think he wanted to be the center of attention. I think he would have been happy to remain quietly anonymous and let literally any progressive bill pass, just as long as he himself was viewed as opposing it. He was happy to just collect his checks from the coal companies and the oil companies and retire on that. I don't think he wanted the spotlight. And frankly, I give the Congress an F. I give the party an F. I don't really pay that much attention to Manchin and Sinema. I know people go nuts and say, well, it's the reason that everything sucks. You know what? You want to pass legislation, win more elections, run better candidates, grab some seats that were vulnerable. Instead of spending, $600 trillion for Beto O'Rourke, who was not going to win that seat, why couldn't we turn some of that money around to races that maybe were winnable? Places where far right-wing Republicans primaried more moderate Republicans, where there were actual opportunities to make some headway for Democrats. If not outright win, at least let people know that they were there and they were in the game. Find vulnerable seats. Find seats that you might over time be able to flip. Invest in places that you're not investing in now. Go out and win elections. I have no sympathy for the Democratic Party, who makes tactical blunder, strategic blunder after blunder after blunder. They have the political instincts of, they have the survival instincts of a lemming. I don't get it. Losers don't legislate, quoting Roger Stone. Sorry about that, but he's right. You're not happy with Manchin obstructing your agenda? You should have won more seats. You should have made better efforts. You should have gotten on message. You should have figured out what your damn message was. I'm not going to get into this. This is not what this show is about. This is not what this episode is about. It is not Manchin's fault that we find ourselves in the spot we're in. It is not Manchin's fault that the president's approval rating is at 42%. You've done very little, and you've tried to do only slightly more than that. There are so many fights that haven't even been started yet. This list of promises not executed on? Where is police reform? Now you're going to say, well, there was police reform bill, it stalled, and there's intra-party fighting. Yes, but the president is nowhere on this issue. The president has not shown up to these meetings. Where is criminal justice reform? Where is marijuana reform? Where is tax reform? Where is student loan reform? Where is healthcare reform? Where is energy reform? Where is immigration reform? I have to quote. I'll quote Toby Ziegler. It's not the battles we lose that bother me. It's the ones we don't suit up for. It seems like so early on we just settled into this inevitability of the failure of this administration. And what grade am I possibly supposed to give this president on domestic issues? And I understand, again, well, Manchin is obstructing everything. Well, it's a narrow majority in the Senate. Well, this and that. I'm not grading on a curve here. I'm not going to grade on a curve because Joe Manchin's in Congress. I'm not going to grade on a curve because Biden's predecessor was a piece of shit. It doesn't lower the bar. It is what it is. You either win or you lose. You either do something or you do nothing. You either try to do something or try nothing. And this administration has opted for the latter more often than not. Do I give him an F on domestic policy? No. I give him a W for withdraw. You don't get graded if you don't show up. It's an F for the Democratic Party. This president's been in office for a year. The Democrats have been coughing up elections for 20. The Democratic Party has provided more meaningful opposition to this president and this Congress than it did to the Republican president and the Republican Congress. They have thwarted more of Biden's plans than Trump's. And don't come at me about this, because where Trump got obstructed was the courts. The courts stopped some of the more extreme and onerous Trump policies. There was never a day that I didn't feel like Donald Trump was doing everything he could to enact his view of the world. There's no doubt in my mind he was doing everything he could to keep dark-skinned people out of this country. That he was doing everything he could to keep Muslims out of this country. He was doing everything he could to allow American business to continue to pillage this country's wealth. That he was doing everything he could to destroy the environment. I never doubted that. I don't know what Joe Biden works on every day. I don't know. It's not the things that he promised us. I don't know what he's working on. Get in the fight. You lose, you lose. If you lose, I'll show up and vote for you again, because maybe we can get him in the next round. If you don't show up, well, neither am I. Neither am I. I didn't vote for president in 2012 after enthusiastically voting for Obama in 2008. I won't vote in 24. I'll vote for the down ballot. I will show up. I'm not going to vote for you. As for final thoughts on this, did I have high hopes for this president? I did. I saw an enthusiasm in this president and his people that I hoped would translate. And that's also, and I have to say that to me was surprising. It was a pleasant surprise, because what I expected from this president was a status quo president, which I think was a good thing coming off the heels of Trump. We needed to return to and maintain the status quo for 4 years. Notice I said 4. That was always my plan for this president. That's what I hoped for this president. But even the status quo, and not through fault of Biden's, but the status quo has diminished. It has gotten worse and worse for the American people. So that's not even good enough anymore. I thought he would do something, some things. He's done nothing. I don't know what to say. What's the grade? D? D minus? I can't give him an F because Congress gets an F. The party gets an F. I also wouldn't give Donald Trump an F on his presidency. I'd have to give him maybe a D. So maybe Biden gets a D+. So there it is, D+. It's not good enough. It's not good. I wouldn't hire you with that transcript. And I'm not going to hire you in 2024 unless things turn around. But your big opportunity is gone. Your first year was your chance. Build those bridges. Get the party under control. Find something that they all can live with. You could have broken up the Build Back Better bill, something I suggested and was screaming about in September and October, and I got shouted down. But now Biden finally, at the end of January, came around on that and said, well, we might have to pass it in smaller bills. Well, I have news for you. That's not going to happen now. It's not going to happen between now and November. So the only hope of that happening is if, by some miracle, the Democrats retain control of Congress. It's not going to happen. September was the time to do that, was the time to make a deal. So even on that, he was late to come around. D+. D+, and I'm over it. I'm over it. We continue our decline. We continue our inevitable march towards something horrific in 2024. And I've said this before. My level of anger towards the Democratic Party far outstrips my anger towards the Republican Party. They are exactly what I expect them to be. Anti-intellectual xenophobes. But the Democratic Party, I hoped for better. I hoped for better. I hoped for something, some sign of life. Stacey Abrams can't do this alone. D+, D for disgrace. D for Democrat. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. I think you may have noticed that I did not grade him on the economy. And there are two reasons for this. One is 2 weeks from now, the next episode, Mike is back as co-host, and we'll be discussing inflation and the broader economy. So we're going to get into those issues there. The other reason I didn't grade him on it is because one of my assertions that I make in that episode is the president has far less control and influence over economy than a lot of people think he does or want him to. So I'm not going to grade him on something that is, I believe, more out of his control than in. So we don't talk about this on this episode. There's going to be no grade on this, but you can listen in for that episode in 2 weeks. We'll be back. Check us out on our website, drinkersthinkers.com. Check out the blog there. We actually had one of the recent blog posts really blew up. It was a post about gas prices. So check that out. Share it around. Join our mailing list so you can stay in touch. And as always, please send us your comments, questions, and suggestions. Start a conversation. I like that. So, I'll remind you, think first, drink later, and often. And I'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks so much.